Two brothers, raised in the same nursery, same nurses, same prayers before bed, same tutors teaching them the same maps. One of them will bury the other before either reaches the throne their father promised them both. This is not a rare story. It is one of the most repeated patterns in the history of monarchy. From Constantinople to Delhi, from the Kremlin to the Vatican, the most dangerous person in a royal palace was almost never the enemy at the gate. It was the sibling in the next room. 10 heirs, 10 sibling killings, 10 dynasties that produced their own executioners. Start with a king who thought he was winning. October 1072. Castile. Sancho II is 34 years old, eldest son of Ferdinand I, the ruler who had unified Leon, Castile, and Galicia into the most powerful Christian kingdom in Iberia. On his deathbed, Ferdinand had divided that kingdom among his 5 children: Castile to Sancho, Leon to Alfonso, Galicia to Garcia, cities to the 2 sisters. Urraca received Zamora. Sancho did not accept the division. He drove Garcia out of Galicia into exile in Muslim Seville. He defeated Alfonso at Golpejera and forced him to flee to Toledo, where the Muslim ruler Al-Mamun took him in as a guest. That left the sisters. He marched on Zamora. Urraca refused to surrender it. The siege lasted months. Then, on the 7th of October, a knight named Velido Dolfos rode out of the city and offered to show the king a weakness in the walls. Sancho went with him alone. Velido drove a spear into the king's back and fled back inside the gates before the royal guards could reach him. The chronicles all pointed the same direction. Velido had come from Urraca's court. The throne of Castile was empty by nightfall. Alfonso rode back from Toledo and took the crown. Before he was crowned, the great vassals of Castile, with the young El Cid among them, required the new king to publicly swear at the church of Santa Gadia in Burgos that he had no part in his brother's death. The oath became one of the most famous scenes in medieval Spanish memory. It survived because everyone assumed there was something to swear about. Alfonso VI went on to conquer Toledo in 1085 and became the greatest of Ferdinand's sons. Sancho is buried at Oña. The unified kingdom he had killed his brothers to build was assembled by the brother he had exiled. Sancho died in daylight, in armor, in front of witnesses. The next brother killing happened at night, in a river, with no witnesses at all. Rome, June 14, 1497. A family dinner at the vineyard of Vanozza de Catane, former mistress of Pope Alexander VI. The men at the table are her sons by the Pope: Cesare, 21, a cardinal against his will; Joffre, the youngest; and Juan, Duke of Gandia, the papal captain general, the favorite. He is 22 and wearing a mask. The brothers ride back toward the city together. Somewhere along the way, Juan turns off the road with a single masked companion. He rides into the dark. He never comes back. The next morning, the Tiber is dragged. A boatman named Giorgio Schiavi remembers watching, the night before, a group of men on horseback lift a body from a white horse and swing it into the water. When it did not sink, they threw stones at it until it did. He had not reported it. When asked why, he answered that he had seen 100 corpses thrown into the Tiber in his lifetime, and no one had ever asked about any of them. Juan was pulled out the next day. 9 stab wounds. Throat cut. His purse of 30 ducats still on him. Not a robbery. Alexander VI, in the words of the Venetian ambassador Marino Sanudo, wept for 3 days without stopping. He announced reforms of the church. He called for the killers to be found. Then, within weeks, he stopped. Every court in Italy was naming the same suspect, the cardinal brother who wanted the military command. Cesare was never formally charged. Historians remain divided. Some argue for the Orsini, others for a private grudge, but the Pope's silence remains the strangest piece of evidence. A father who had wept without stopping suddenly stopped asking who had done it. Months later, Cesare petitioned to renounce his cardinal's hat. He shed the red robes and took over Juan's military role. Machiavelli would later write The Prince with him as the model. The frescoes Pinturicchio painted for the Borgia apartments still show the family in gold. Alexander enthroned, Juan alive, the whole household painted before the vineyard dinner. Juan is still up on the wall. He is still 22. The Tiber does not appear in any Pinturicchio painting, but it is the reason the paintings tell the story they do. In Rome, the killing stayed inside the family. In the next palace, a stepmother helped write the death warrant, and an entire army watched the prince walk into the tent where the cord was waiting. Southern Anatolia, October 1553. The Ottoman army is on campaign against Persia. Suleiman the Magnificent is 59. His eldest surviving son and heir apparent is Shehzadeh Mustafa. Mustafa is 38, born of Suleiman's first consort, Mahidevran. The Janissaries love him. Foreign ambassadors, including Ogier Giselin de Busbecq, the Habsburg envoy, describe him as the most likely candidate for the succession. But there is a problem inside the harem. Suleiman's other sons are the children of Hurrem Sultan, the concubine-turned-legal wife who has spent years building a faction. Her son-in-law, Rustem Pasha, is Grand Vizier. Together they feed the Sultan a slow current of intelligence. Mustafa is corresponding with the Janissaries. Mustafa is plotting. By the time the army reaches the camp at Ereğli, Suleiman has decided. Mustafa is summoned to reaffirm his loyalty. His advisors warn him. The Janissaries in his own retinue offer to protect him. He refuses their protection. He walks toward his father's tent unarmed. Ottoman custom forbade the shedding of royal blood. Mutes were kept for this purpose, servants who could not speak of what they did. Inside the tent, they were waiting with a silken bowstring. Busbecq's account, based on eyewitnesses, describes what followed. Mustafa struggled. The mutes were momentarily overpowered. Suleiman, watching from behind a curtain, shouted at them to finish it. They did. The body was carried out. The Janissaries broke into open mourning outside the camp. Rustem Pasha was temporarily dismissed from the Grand Vizierate to appease them. Mustafa's own young son, held in Bursa, was strangled shortly after. Ottoman succession law did not tolerate surviving heirs of a purged prince. The empire's court poets composed Mercier, laments, for Mustafa. Some of these poems survived the Sultan's censorship. They are still read in Turkish literature classes today. The son who eventually inherited was Selim, Hurrem's son. As Selim II, he is remembered as the point at which the empire's long decline began. His nickname in the chronicles is Selim the Sot. Suleiman lived 13 more years. He wrote poetry under his pen name, Muhibi. In none of his surviving verses does he name his eldest son. From an Ottoman tent, we move north to Kievan Rus, where two young princes were killed on the same road, days apart, by messengers sent from the same brother. Kiev, 1015. Vladimir the Great, the prince who converted Rus to Christianity, has just died. His body is smuggled out at night through a hole broken in the wall of the house because his sons are already coming. The eldest surviving son was Sviatopolk. The Prince Vladimir had loved most was Boris. Young, pious, returning from a campaign against the Pechenegs, Sviatopolk moved first. He seized Kiev. He distributed money to the townspeople. He sent riders south along the road Boris was traveling. Boris was camped on the Alta River. His men urged him to march on Kiev and take the throne by force. He refused. According to the primary chronicle, he said he would not raise his hand against his elder brother. He sent his soldiers home. He slept in his tent. The assassins stabbed him through the tent walls before dawn. The chronicle records that he was not yet dead when they wrapped him in the tent canvas to carry him back to Kiev. Sviatopolk's men had to finish the work on the road. Days later, other riders reached his younger brother Gleb on the Dnieper. They sent him a false message that his father was still alive and asking to see him. Gleb rode south. His own cook, bribed by the assassins, cut his throat on his own boat. Sviatopolk earned an epithet that stayed with him for 1,000 years. In Russian church history, he is Sviatopolk the Accursed. Yaroslav, another brother, marched south, drove him into exile, and ruled the next 35 years. Boris and Gleb were canonized as the first native saints of the Russian Orthodox Church. Their icons have been painted for 1,000 years. In every one of them, the two young men look at each other. Not at the killer, not at the throne, at each other. There is one uncomfortable footnote. The man who benefited most from the killings was Yaroslav the Wise. He was also the prince who patronized the chronicles that named Sviatopolk as the killer. Some historians now argue that the saints of Rus may have been killed by the brother history calls Wise. The truth is that no one alive knows which brother sent the assassins to Boris's tent. In Kiev, the killer denied the murder. In Rome, a brother stabbed his brother in their mother's arms and then ordered the empire to forget his face. December 26, 211. The Palatine Hill. Two young emperors have inherited the empire jointly from their father, Septimius Severus. Caracalla, 23. Geta, 22. Coins across the empire show their profiles side by side. Officially, they are brothers ruling together in the fraternal harmony their father had commanded from his deathbed. Officially. Inside the palace, they have divided the residence physically. Separate wings, separate entrances, separate cooks who taste food for separate poisons. They have hated each other since childhood. Their mother, Julia Domna, a Syrian woman of formidable intelligence, sometimes described by contemporary sources as effectively running the imperial court, summoned both her sons to her private chambers for a reconciliation meeting. She insisted they come unarmed. Geta came unarmed. Caracalla did not. Cassius Dio, who was in Rome at the time and knew members of the imperial household, records what happened. Centurions loyal to Caracalla stepped from behind curtains and stabbed Geta as he stood beside his mother. He ran to Julia and threw his arms around her neck. He died in her arms. Her hand was cut by the blades. She was not permitted to cry out. Within days, Caracalla issued the order for damnatio memoriae. Every inscription bearing Geta's name across the empire was to be erased. Every image was to be effaced. 20,000 people were purged in the weeks that followed. Some were executed. Others were exiled. Julia Domna was forbidden to mourn her son publicly. She was required to appear at court beside the son who had killed the other. She held that role for 6 more years, until Caracalla was assassinated by a soldier while relieving himself by the roadside on the march to Carrhae. The Arch of the Argentari still stands in Rome. It shows Septimius Severus, Julia Domna, Caracalla, and an empty rectangle where Geta once stood. The chisel marks are still visible. Tourists photograph it every day. The blank space is more famous than the portraits around it. His absence is the most photographed part of Roman family archaeology. In Rome, the killing was imperial and public. On the steps of a Greek temple 2 centuries earlier, a queen arranged her sister's murder from another country. Ephesus, 41 BCE, the Temple of Artemis. Arsinoe IV has been living in the sanctuary for 6 years. She is a daughter of Ptolemy XII. Her sister is Cleopatra. 6 years earlier, Arsinoe had briefly ruled Egypt in her own name during the Alexandrine War. When Caesar won, she was captured and paraded in chains in his Roman triumph. The crowd, according to Cassius Dio, actually pitied her. Caesar spared her life and allowed her to retire to Ephesus, where the ancient right of asylum protected anyone who reached the altar. Cleopatra never forgave the survival. For 6 years, she pressed her Roman allies to finish the matter. Under Caesar, Rome refused. Under Mark Antony, she had more leverage. She was his lover, ally, and financier. Antony's soldiers arrived at Ephesus. Josephus and Cassius Dio both record what followed. Arsinoe was dragged from the sanctuary and killed on the steps. The right of asylum, one of the oldest religious protections in the Mediterranean world, was violated openly by a Roman commander acting on the request of an Egyptian queen. In 1926, an Austrian archaeologist excavated a monumental Hellenistic tomb in the center of Ephesus, the Octagon, a small, elegant, 8-sided structure. Inside were the remains of a young woman. Some archaeologists argue the tomb is Arsinoe's. If it is, thousands of tourists a day walk past the grave of the sister Cleopatra, killed without knowing whose bones they are standing beside. Cleopatra ruled another 11 years. She died in Alexandria after Actium. The Ptolemaic dynasty ended with her. She had killed her sister in Ephesus to secure a line that ended with her own suicide. 2 sisters, 2 Ptolemies, 1 tomb in Ephesus, unmarked for 2,000 years, 1 tomb in Alexandria that has never been found. Neither line survived them. From temple steps we moved to a London wine cellar, where an English prince was executed inside the tower by an Act of Parliament signed by his own brother. February 18th, 1478. The Tower of London. A private execution, without a scaffold, without a crowd. George, Duke of Clarence, brother of King Edward IV, brother of the future Richard III, and until this month one of the wealthiest magnates in England. Clarence had been a serial traitor. He had rebelled with Warwick against Edward. He had defected back and been forgiven. He had accused the Queen's family, the Woodvilles, of witchcraft. He had personally arrested and executed one of his own servants, a woman named Anchoret Twiniho, without any royal warrant, a legal outrage even for a duke. Then he had begun intriguing again over rumors that Edward was illegitimate. Edward finally lost patience. He accused Clarence of treason before Parliament in person. Parliament passed an Act of Attainder, a bill declaring the Duke guilty and forfeiting his lands and titles to the crown. This was not a jury trial. It was legislation, a dynasty voting inside itself to end one of its own members. There is no official record of the execution method. Contemporary chroniclers, the writer of the Croyland Chronicle and later Dominic Mancini, recorded a persistent story circulating in London within days, that Clarence, given a choice, chose to be drowned in a butt of Malmsey wine. Malmsey was his favorite drink. Historians have argued about the barrel for 5 centuries. Shakespeare put the story on stage 100 years later and preserved it for every English schoolchild since. What is certain is that Clarence was executed on his brother's order, ratified by Act of Parliament, drafted and signed and sealed inside the royal family. The killing was legal. The paperwork was in order. Clarence had 2 surviving children. His son was executed by Henry VII in 1499 at the age of 24, on grounds of being the last legitimate Plantagenet male in existence. His daughter, Margaret Pole, was executed by Henry VIII in 1541 at the age of 67 after being dragged to the block by an inexperienced executioner. She was the last Plantagenet killed by a Tudor. Clarence's attainder outlived him for 2 generations. In London, the killing at least ended in a barrel. In the Ottoman court, another Shehzad was chased across 3 empires and finally strangled in a Persian palace with all 4 of his sons, after his half-brother paid gold for the killing. 1559. The plain outside Konya. 2 Ottoman princes have brought armies to face each other. Selim and Bayezid, the 2 surviving sons of Suleiman by Hurrem. Both know that only one of them can inherit, and that Ottoman succession custom does not tolerate surviving rivals. Bayezid loses. He flees east across Anatolia with his household and his sons, 4 of them, the youngest still a small child. He crosses into Safavid Persia. He throws himself on the mercy of Shah Tahmasp, the enemy his father has spent his life fighting. Tahmasp receives him, in the diplomatic language of the Safavid court, as a royal guest, in the practical language of statecraft, as a bargaining chip. The negotiation between Istanbul and Kazvin lasts almost 2 years. Suleiman sends envoys and gold. Letters between the 2 rulers read like the wording of a contract for the sale of a horse. What is the price of a prince? What is the price of his sons? Tahmasp accepts a payment. In the summer of 1561, Ottoman envoys arrive in Kazvin. Bayezid is brought before them. The formalities of state hospitality are observed. Then he is strangled with a bowstring. His 4 sons, the youngest reportedly no more than 3 years old, are strangled with him. A 5th son, held under Ottoman custody in Bursa, is executed the same week. Ottoman court chroniclers who normally accepted the practice of fratricide as necessary statecraft found the scale of the killing hard to record without unease. The bodies of Bayezid and his sons were returned to Ottoman soil under diplomatic escort and buried at Sivas. Ottoman inscriptions on the tomb identify Bayezid only as a son of Sultan Suleiman. There is no reference to his exile or the manner of his death. The graves of his young sons lie beside him. Suleiman had 6 known sons. He outlived 5 of them. The one who inherited was the one who drank. The Safavid archives preserve the exchange of letters. Diplomatic historians have published translations. The killing of Bayezid and his children was priced item by item, in ducats and in political concessions. It is one of the most unusual documented murders in early modern history, a killing that took the form of a negotiated commercial transaction between 2 empires. From a Persian palace we return to Russia, to a small courtyard in a provincial town north of Moscow, where the last Rurikid heir was found dead at the age of 8, and a country spent the next 4 centuries arguing about who killed him. Uglich, May 15, 1591. A boy of 8 is found in the palace courtyard with a wound in his throat. He is Tsarevich Dmitry Ivanovich, the youngest son of Ivan IV, Ivan the Terrible, and his last surviving male heir. He is the half-brother of the reigning Tsar Fyodor, who is 34, mentally frail, deeply pious, and childless. If Dmitry lives, Dmitry inherits Russia. Dmitry had been sent to Uglich with his mother Maria Nagaya and her family in 1584. Officially, the appanage was his to govern. Practically, it was internal exile. Moscow was being run by Boris Godunov, Fyodor's brother-in-law and effective regent. According to the official investigation led by Prince Vasily Shuisky, Dmitry had suffered an epileptic seizure while playing with a knife and had cut his own throat. Almost no one in Russia believed it. Godunov was blamed. He had motive. When Fyodor died childless in 1598, Godunov was elected Tsar, the first ruler in Russian history to inherit through election rather than blood. His reign lasted 7 years and ended in famine and disaster. Then the pretenders began to appear. In 1604, a young man arrived in Poland claiming to be Dmitry, miraculously escaped. He was given a Polish army. When Godunov died suddenly in 1605, the pretender reached Moscow and was crowned in the Kremlin. He reigned less than a year before being killed in a coup, and his ashes fired from a cannon in the direction of Poland. A second false Dmitry appeared within 2 years. A third appeared in the north. Polish troops occupied Moscow. Swedish troops occupied Novgorod. The state effectively ceased to function. The period is remembered as the Time of Troubles. It ended in 1613 with the election of Michael Romanov, the first Romanov, founder of the dynasty that would rule Russia until 1918. The palace bell of Uglich, which had rung to announce Dmitry's death, was formally tried, found guilty of raising sedition, publicly whipped, had its clapper removed, and was exiled to Siberia. It hung in Tobolsk for 3 centuries. It is now back in Uglich, in a museum. Visitors can see it today. Modern historians increasingly complicate the traditional story. Some argue Godunov had nothing to do with the death, and the accident was real. Others point at the Nagoy family, Dmitry's own maternal relatives, as either negligent guardians or active participants in a botched plot. The half-brother's court may not have needed to lift a hand. The killing may have been done by the boy's own family, or by no one at all. The last Rurikid died in a courtyard. Russia spent the next century arguing about who did it. The dynasty that had built the country ended at the edge of a small knife. In Delhi, 70 years later, the killer wrote a signed decree and had his brother's head sent to their father on a plate. Delhi, August 30th, 1659. A prisoner is being paraded through the streets of the Mughal capital. He is mounted on a filthy elephant. He is dressed in rags. Beside him, chained, is his 14-year-old son. The crowd along the route is weeping openly. Bernier, the French physician who was present, records that the grief of the people was universal. The prisoner is Dara Shikoh. He is 44. He is the eldest son of Shah Jahan, the emperor who built the Taj Mahal, and until 18 months earlier, he was the heir apparent to the peacock throne. He was a scholar of Persian, Arabic, and Sanskrit. He had commissioned Persian translations of the Upanishads. He had studied with Sufi masters and Hindu ascetics. He believed the two great religious traditions of India were expressions of the same underlying truth and had written a book called The Confluence of the Two Oceans, arguing exactly that. His younger brother Aurangzeb had spent 20 years as viceroy of the Deccan, building a military base and positioning himself as the protector of Orthodox Islamic tradition. When Shah Jahan fell seriously ill in September 1657, the four brothers went to war for the succession. Aurangzeb allied with the youngest, Murad, and defeated Dara at Samagar in June 1658. Dara fled west across India with his family and a shrinking force. For 14 months he was hunted. In the mountains near the Bolan Pass, he took refuge with an Afghan chieftain named Malik Jiwan, whose life he himself had once saved by intervening with Shah Jahan on his behalf. Malik Jiwan seized him and delivered him to Aurangzeb's men. The parade through the streets was deliberate. Aurangzeb wanted the population of the capital to see that the man they had been taught to regard as their future emperor was now a broken prisoner in dirty clothes. Bernier writes that the crowd's reaction alarmed the court so much that plans for a longer public procession were cut short. Aurangzeb convened a court of religious scholars. They were asked to rule on whether Dara's translations of Hindu scriptures constituted apostasy from Islam. Given who had convened it, the court ruled that they did. The sentence for apostasy under classical Islamic law was death. On the night of August 30th, executioners entered the cell. Dara was beheaded. His head was brought to Aurangzeb. Aurangzeb ordered it washed and placed on a plate. The plate was sent to Agra, to the fortress where Shah Jahan was held under house arrest. Shah Jahan received the plate. According to Bernier and the Italian traveler Minucci, the old emperor recognized his son's head. He did not eat that day. He sent word that he wished to be left alone. He lived 7 more years, held in the Agra fort, the palace complex he himself had built. His daughter Jahanara chose to share his imprisonment. From the window of the tower where he was kept, he could see the Taj Mahal across the river, the tomb he had built for his wife Mumtaz Mahal, Dara's mother. He watched it every day. Aurangzeb finished the destruction of his brothers within 2 years. Shah Shuja fled to Burma and disappeared in the jungles there. Murad, once his ally, was arrested, imprisoned, and executed on a trumped-up charge. By 1661, Aurangzeb had killed or eliminated all 3 of his brothers and imprisoned his father. He was the undisputed emperor. He reigned for 49 years. By the time he died, the empire had begun to crack. Within 50 years, it was in ruins. Dara was buried anonymously in the tomb complex of the Emperor Humayun in Delhi. His grave was not identified with certainty for centuries, but his ideas traveled further than his body did. In 1801, a French Orientalist named Abraham Hyacinthe Anquetil Duperron published a Latin translation of Dara's Persian version of the Upanishads. That translation reached the German philosopher Arthur Schopenhauer, who read it every night for the rest of his life, and wrote that it had been the consolation of his existence and would be the consolation of his death. The Prince Aurangzeb, declared an apostate, became the reason European philosophy first encountered the sacred literature of Hinduism. 10 palaces, 10 sibling killings, 10 families that produced their own executioners inside the same nursery, the same court, the same religion, the same map. A king speared outside a city his sister defended. A duke pulled from the Tiber with his purse still full. A prince strangled in his father's tent by mutes who could not speak of what they did. 2 boys who refused to fight, becoming the saints of a nation ruled by brothers who did. A Roman emperor's face chiseled off every wall in the empire by the brother who stabbed him in their mother's arms. A queen dragged from a temple sanctuary and killed on the steps by soldiers hired by her own sister. An English duke drowned by legend in a barrel of wine after Parliament voted to end him. An Ottoman prince and 4 small sons strangled in a Persian palace for a price negotiated in gold. An 8-year-old boy found in a courtyard with a knife in his throat, ending a dynasty that had built a country. A Mughal crown prince beheaded on the order of the brother who inherited an empire and destroyed it. The plate was silver. The head was his son's. And the empire had, though no one in the room knew it yet, already ended.